Bro, I'm just gonna say it though, modern stories are so bad. They're not willing to be offensive, they're not willing to be gruesome, they're not willing to be gritty. There's no realism to it, there's no realism to it, there's no immersion to it. There's no world that I'm actually a part of that is lived in. Yes, because I'm your husband, biatch. Get on your knees. Right, but I miss stories that were made for adults. I really do. You know, you think of a film like Gladiator. I mean, that's a story that just encaptures you immediately. And, you know, also Lord of the Rings, it's a different level of maturity, but it's made for adults. And, geez, I mean, remember Beowulf, right? That movie? The fact that I think the game's super loud. I'm bringing it down just a tad. Anyways, remember Beowulf, how Angelina Jolie was literally naked in that movie? God, that was amazing, dude. And I just miss stories that were not afraid of being mature and having mature content, right? Having attractive women that are either practically naked or mostly naked. I think all that Angelina Jolie had covering herself was golden paint in Beowulf. And, I mean, she was freaking hot, right? And now, right, you wouldn't get that nowadays. She would be covered up. She would be uglified. We can't get mature storylines or anything anymore. And, like, everything has to be liberal. Everything has to be sanitized. Everything has to be inoffensive, right? It's like, you know, you can't have a story about hate. You can't have a story about anger and resentment. You can't have stories about these things. And it's because of how much we believe that we have to absolutely, without any shred of doubt, we have to sanitize everything. I mean, we literally act like everyone is on the verge too. Now in modern day, we act like everyone's on the verge, the ever-living present verge of becoming some kind of, you know, serial killer psychopath. They act like you can't see mature content in a story, and like, you know, like make a story that's about a Sith, right? A dark side user story within Star Wars. It's gritty, it's dark, horrific things happen, and then don't sit there and be scared or act like your audience can't just deal with it, right? That they can't just process with it and just be like, oh wow, that's freaking crazy, you know, wow, that was intense, and that was really deep, whatever the story was on about. And the whole story, by the way, the entire moral of the story is nothing liberal. I mean, it's like, this group of people got enslaved and they deserve to be enslaved. That's that end of the story. Give us other stories. I'm so sick and tired of all this liberalism bullcrap. I want to have dark stories, gritty stories. And I'm so sick and tired of the fact that we have to be babied all the time, that we can't just have a gruesome story where the audience is treated like, yeah, you can just take it because you're not a child, and we're not going to act like every single person that's watching this thing is an on the verge psychopath. And also psychopathy is different than, you know, a dark storyline or whatever. But, right, the whole thing about how, and you know, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to analyze into the words I'm using here, but right, the whole thing about there's no light without dark. Well, you don't have, I'm not saying this is an absolute truth, but there is an element to this that's worth saying, which is that you don't have a great story, right? You don't have great kindred stories without a decent serving of also dark and gruesome stories. If you're going to sell me a story about how the rebels free themselves from slavery, then I need to start seeing some stories about how rebels even get enslaved in the first place, and they're douchebags, right? Part of it is that they deserved it, part of it is that they don't, or whatever. Or they completely deserved it. Make stories that vary across the moral landscape. But we live within a propagandistic landscape right now. That's what I'll call it. It's a landscape right now. It's a propagandistic landscape of storytelling where you can only see one type of story, and it's anything that's liberal, and it's anything that stirs up positive emotion at all times. We can't just have a story that's grueling, right? And I don't mean it in the way that leftists do it, right? Where they're super obsessed with gore, and they're super obsessed with their nihilism, their atheism, and their death. No, screw that stuff. I don't care about liberal senses of gruesome. Because all it is that it's supposed to be so horrifying, right? It's what it is. It's horror prawn. It is horror prawn. It is horrify me prawn. That's all it is. It's victim prawn. It's, you're a slave prawn. You're going to free yourself from slavery prawn. That's all it is, right? It's all this kink and fetish of horrify me of a story that's outside of my liberal ideals, so that then I'm that much more invigorated by my liberalism. I'm so sick and tired of it, dude. Just give me a gritty story. That's it. That's all you need to do. Stop treating us, the customer, the viewer, whatever, as children, where we have to see everything that is 100% sanitized, and we're being coddled as we're being shown a story. Just make it stop. Love of God. Remove myself. That is toxic, sir. That is toxic. This is the thing that frustrates me, is that I'm okay with stories like these existing, right? But the problem is the fact that we can't have any stories that are opposite to this. And, this is the thing, is that people are just begging at this point, like, please give me a gritty storyline. You know how long people have been begging for a Sith side story? A story about the bad guys, where the bad guy, by the way, doesn't turn into a good guy. The bad guy's a bad guy, and that's it. And the story is where the bad guy is justified. They have their convictions. They will not back down on their convictions. They are set on being on the bad guy's side. But we don't have stories made for adults anymore. We have stories made for children. We can never justify the villain. Never. And I'm not talking again about liberals and how they like to make these right, what do you call them? These relatable villains or whatever, where basically it's a villain but they're poorly misunderstood, and really, it's a piece of it's all based on identity politics. No, outside of identity politics, I want to see you have a story where you justify the villain. I want to see a storyline where the villain, I get his perspective. I get why he thinks that way, right? I get why he's a bad guy. Yeah, I like sympathetic villain storylines. Not by liberals, because they don't understand good and evil. But it would be great to have a story where it's like we're not always jerking off the freaking hero. And that's what we do. We do this freaking weird hero worship jerk off session all the time with stories nowadays. We can't have a story just about a villain. Or the villain who's actually somewhat a good guy, somewhat not. Maybe he's neutral, right? Maybe he's a bit of an anti-hero, whatever, right? Maybe it's like, oh, you know what? I get it. I get why. I side against the hero. It's so lazy. Listen, when you're not making a choice between two options, you're not making a choice at all. If you are forced, and you must comply to align with one side of the ideological spectrum, right? You are forced to comply with liberalism and all of its ideals, and how we always have to believe that good guys are basically liberals. If we have to always have these stories, then you don't believe in a hero. You believe in a homogenous drone, a homogenous slave, a simpleton who's told how to act and how to behave, and they are a dutiful slave. And that's all it is. It's a dutiful slave narrative and storyline. You're not getting an actual story about someone that had to make a choice, or about a story where you, the viewer, the audience, you make the choice. Is this person right? Are they wrong? But they don't want to treat you like an adult anymore these days. Modern storytelling will not, and it will refuse at every which direction you go to treat you as an adult. They'll do everything in their power instead to treat you like a child. How dare you make your own choices and decisions? How dare you sit there and discern for yourself if the hero or the villain is true or correct? And how dare a writer ever make a villain where, oh, that's why the guy's a bad guy. I get it. Right? How dare you do that? We always have to make these villains, even if they're understandable. It's like, well, clearly they're wrong, but you're going to just see, like, why do they think the way they do? And you're going to feel sorry for them, but obviously they're wrong. I'm so sick and tired of it. All of it is indoctrination. Bro, what is going on with this guy? You're taking forever, guy. What are you waiting on? I am so unbelievably tired of how we're not given a choice anymore. We're not allowed to have a choice anymore. What, do I have to sleep here or what? What's going on? There is such a thing as dark psychology. The human mind is possessed by both dark and what? You want to call it like, it's not really dark and light, but right, it's like dark and kindred psychology. You cannot shut out dark psychology and act like it doesn't exist and that it will never exist. You can't do that. You can't shut it out. That's where you create people who are slaves of their own mind. No, you have to tame the beast within you, as well as you have to tame the beast, but also manifest the beast within your persona, within your psyche, as well as the gentleman. Both must be cultivated, and you can't just trap out the other in full preference for one, because then what you're doing is that you are suffocating yourself, and there will always be that inherent desire to not suffocate yourself on one side of the psyche. The human mind desires both ends of the psychological domain. There must be, and there has to be, a mixture, a balance of the dark psychology as well as the light psychology. Or, kindred, or what, the sophisticated. The dark and the gruesome and the sophisticated psychology. And here's the thing, if you never come to terms with your gruesome psychology, then you will always have some sense of episode, some sense of you're not going to be a master of your own home inside of your head. You will never be able to be a master of your own home. You will always be a slave to your own mind if you cannot come to terms with both your sophisticated and your gruesome psychology. And that does not mean that you tamper down either one. It means that you understand how to utilize either one and how to justify either one within your mind. And to justify means to discern, how to make a choice, right? The whole idea of justification, how to rationalize your position. But we act like that the gruesome psychology is possessed by irreverence and the sort of, we act like it's a belligerent psychology. But you have plenty of individuals on both sides of the coin who are both they're belligerent, whether they are sophisticated or gruesome. But then you also have individuals who are, whether they're gruesome or sophisticated, or they're displaying either or of psychological domain, and that individual is not belligerent, right? They're a very even keel individual, right? Better word, temperance. They're a very temperate individual, and yet they possess, with the right discernment, they're gruesome and that randomly got blasted up. But you have individuals who are temperate, and they possess both, and they know when to possess their gruesome and their sophisticated psychology. And specifically when I talk about this, it's really men, right? Because women are the ones who truly do have scorn for the world, right? And it's not that they're stronger than men or anything, it's just that men have far more forgiveness of the world than women do. And of course, if a woman were to possess, and this is why men or women are different, and this is why, what I'm talking about doesn't work for women, because if they had a gruesome mindset, they would just ravage the world. So they can only be kindred. They can only be shapened in the image of temperance. Women are only made to be caretakers. They're not made for war. And that's why when I'm talking about here, this is for men specifically. You must manifest both the gruesome and the sophisticated mind. If you cannot manifest either or, then you will be a prisoner within your own mind. You will be possessed by malevolence, and you will have episodes here and there. You will not be able to control yourself. The only way you can control yourself is learning to justify, to rationalize both sides of your psychology. All throughout history, men have been predicated by both the desire to sophisticate the world, but also the willingness to be gruesome. And it's those very men that have survived each generation, and it's those men who created the future generations, who created civilization. If you ever left any of it up to women, right, this balance of the psyche, we would have been torn apart. And worse than slavery would have ever happened, right? Outright persecution of the highest degree is what would have happened all throughout history. And of course, what we would know is that, well, there wouldn't be history anymore. History would have been completely abolished if women were the ones that were held responsible for the balancing act of the dark side, or, okay, again, gruesome, or the sophisticated psychology of the mind. It's only men that can properly wield it, and it's only men who are meant to properly wield it. It's why men have created philosophy. Because philosophy, right, is how you store generational knowledge on matters of conduct and how to perceive the world within the most reliable manner possible within conduct. And specifically, this should be said, only men can build the world through their rage. And by the way, this is a liberal, feminist / effeminate talking point. We're looking at the world through the lens of a woman, that there is no usage behind your rage, that there is no effort or use out of rage. No, we all know. And by the way, these stories, JRPGs understand this. So many storylines, even by these liberals, even they understand it, that once you tap into your anger and your rage, then you unlock a new range of power. Right? We always do this with characters in these storylines. It was like, for some reason, we're so afraid to admit in real life that you can utilize your rage, that there's utility behind rage. There's a reason why it is an emotion. You don't just have rage because it has no utility. We have rage for all kinds of reasons, right? In a lot of ways, it's a survival instinct, but also it's a decision-making instinct. It's a no BS, right? It's a expediency instinct. I'm not going to waste my time. Screw you. Screw off. We're getting from point A to point B. You're standing in my way, and you're going to get me killed or you're going to get me injured by standing in my way, right? The rage instinct, somewhat synonymous with the killer instinct, is very vital to human psychology and human survival all throughout history and all throughout time. And for us to believe that we must now be these coddled manifestations, isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? During the age of civil rights, civil liberties are under the most attack. Isn't it interesting that during the age of liberal enlightenment and all this, this coddling enlightenment, how we have to coddle the mind, and how, there's something wrong with your rage and your anger and all these masculine impulses, right? That do require discipline, but it's not the impulse that's wrong. It's how you wield right? It's not a sword that's wrong. It's how you wield it, when you wield it, how you discern to wield it. Same thing with rage and anger. You have to understand how to utilize the tool, because you can utilize a tool with both the intent for gruesome and sophistication, outcomes and circumstances. And it can all be for, air quotes on good or directly good, whatever. It can be for an acceptable outcome, whether it's sophisticated or gruesome. And that separates you from the maniacs, by the way, right? Because there's a difference between belligerence and temperance. What we're speaking about here is temperance. You're not belligerent. You're not doing something like a freaking maniac. You're doing something out of decisive prose, okay? And that's what we're talking about here. The human mind is made for both. And it is this feminist / effeminate, right? Possessive femininity that sits there and says that we have to suffocate and we have to shackle masculinity. And in no way is this acceptable, and in no way is this going to create a good world, or strong world, or a reasonable world. All you will do is create weak men, truly corrosive men, broken men. That's all you will do. You will destroy the very stability and the rigidity of its stability within the world. So back to it. Even the liberals know that there is a power and that there is a usage behind rage. But there is a difference, right, between belligerent rage and temperate rage, right? Righteous indignation, right? The Bible is very clear on this. How, right? God is a wrathful God. He is a jealous God, but he's also a loving and a caring God because he is a temperate God. And because nowadays we look at everything through the lens of femininity, women cannot process temperance. They can only process the belligerent. But then they're not even so much belligerent as they are mindless. They lack discernment. They don't have the discernment of men, so they can only process, and they have true scorn. They have true hatred of the world, of themselves, of each other. The female mind can never cater itself or cultivate itself within the gruesome psychology. Only men can possess that without becoming fully belligerent. And to some extent, right, as I said before, it takes discipline to do that. But only men can discipline their mind away from belligerence. Women cannot. But it's because women think this way that they think there's something wrong with a wrathful anything, but specifically a wrathful God, right? A wrathful male archetype, a jealous God, a jealous male archetype. And they do not understand that you can be both wrathful and vengeful and angry and filled with rage and filled with jealousy. But also, on the flip side of that coin, that you can also be temperate, that you can be caring and loving and provisioning and all these things. Women do not understand this because they do not possess the male psyche. They do not possess male processing and reasoning, and men are built fundamentally differently than women. We have higher faculties than women. This is the reason why men all throughout history have been the philosophers, and it has always been down to men. They're the ones who have developed and grown the world, who have cultivated the world, and the world can only be cultivated through both the gruesome, right, rage, and the sophisticated, temperance. Temperance and sophistication, rage and gruesome. What we do nowadays is that we vilify both in our beliefs now, our existential beliefs when it comes down, what the frick is going on? Holy crap, it's a human centipede. Oh my, I do not want to know where they're going. Nowadays we demonize the Bible as if we know any better, and we don't. Because again, we live during the age of the utmost civil rights, and in the age of utmost civil rights, you see the most attack and the most threat falling underneath civil liberties. We live during the age of supposed enlightenment, and the tranquility of mind, of liberal tranquility of mind, how the liberals tell you that you cannot have rage, you cannot have wrath, all these things, because everyone's a freaking maniac, a psychopathic murderer waiting to happen, right? So we have to completely coddle everybody, we have to sanitize everything and everybody. You can't see anything unless it reinforces a liberal position point of view, right? Even in a game like Diablo 4, with all its gruesome storylines and all its gore, even then, a lot of it was being used, not all of it, but a lot of it was being used to reinforce liberal talking points, right? It's by possessing something that's so extreme on what you're horrified by that pushes you even further in the convictions of your beliefs. It's what it is. But it's why they sit there and they demonize the idea of God. It's because they demonize and they hate the idea of faith, of masculinity. Specifically, they demonize the premise of masculinity. And of course, faith is tied to masculinity. More than anything, demagoguery, right, blind support of a authority figure is specifically feminine. It is not of the masculine. Because even when you lead a battalion of men to war, there's a reason why in storytelling we always have speeches, rousing speeches, men talking to each other before they go off and risk their lives or do something that they know is impossible, that they know is ridiculous. Why is that? Why do they think so hard about what they're about to do? Because men are not just blind, mindless followers. Only women are. So demagoguery is specifically a very feminine perspective, you could say. I don't want to oversimplify demagoguery because there's more behind it. I'm just going to say it from this one perspective, is that that's what demagoguery, though, largely is. You will see those who fall under demagoguery the most are women. But men, you always have to rouse the troops when it comes down to men, because men are rational creatures. So you always have to process and reason with them, even when they're soy boys. You know, those guys are a little bit more effeminate than anything else. They will follow demagoguery to some extent, but anyway, it's just so important with our stories, man. Nowadays, all of our stories had to possess... Listen, storytelling is premised within enlightenment, and enlightenment is possessed by reality. You cannot possess a story that is serving its function, right? Serving its monetary function. The reason we pay money for stories, the reason we, throughout generations, sat around campfires telling each other stories is because of enlightenment. It is storing generational value. The only reason you care about a story is because you can get immersed within the reality, the enlightenment of the story. And the only way that you can get immersed within the enlightenment of a story is by possessing the reality of the story. There's no other way around it. You can't do it any other way. You can't make up propaganda. You can't have ideological stances that are unproven or dishonest. That's why wokeness does not work in storytelling, because wokeness is unproven methodology, ideology, it's propaganda, and also simply it is a delusion. Wokeness is a delusion. It does not work within storytelling. You can make a story about the rebels being against an empire, and to some extent that's not completely woke, although it can go woke, because throughout history there's been good and bad empires, there's been good and bad republics. Democracies always fail, they're freaking jokes, but our most stable government systems, republics and empires, can be good and bad because ultimately corruption can possess any governmental system. So you can't have a good story about the rebels who go against the Goliathan Empire. And it's a good story, right? It's about the little guy beating the, right? David versus Goliath is fundamentally what it is. But there are also, and this is the thing I'm getting at, there are also stories where the Empire has every good reason in the world to squash the rebellion. Because the rebellion is full of belligerent children or belligerent losers who think that they have every right, that they are owed, or that they are entitled to change the world in their image. That's why they are the rebellion. They want to change the world in their image. They want to go against the empire because they do not accept the status quo. But all they will bring upon the world and upon the world, everyone that lives in the world around them, all they will bring upon it is death and destruction, or the loss of stability, of a stable civilization. There are stories where the rebellion is evil, or the rebellion is the bad guy, or simply the rebellion is a neutral party. They're not right, they're not wrong, and the empire is not right and it's not wrong, or it is right but the rebellion is also neutral, right? They're not right or wrong. You can understand where they're coming from, but it's like, okay, but I don't exactly have all the reasons in the world to root for them, and in fact I have more reasons, right? The whole thing about anti-heroes, right? You have great stories about villains where it's like, okay, understandable villain, but yet the main character, hero of the story, he's meant to still win because ultimately it's much more worthwhile, I guess, for us as the viewer to invest the time into seeing he wins, right? Despite the fact that it's like, well, I understand why the villain should win to some extent. Same thing works on the other flip side of the coin. There are stories where, right, well, maybe the rebellion isn't so bad, but they're also not right. So the empire should win in this storyline. And again, you also have the stories where the empire is the good guy and the rebels are the bad guys. Where basically, let's say that the rebels, they want to bring about fascism, or fascism synonymous with socialism, whatever. They want to bring about, though, their deceptive fundamental ideology or methodologies. See, you can have so many ways of curtailing a story towards different outcomes and different perspectives or different outlooks, whatever. But this is what we're doing. We're making storytelling flat because we're not willing to accept all the variants in storytelling. You know, one of the hardest things about writing a story, by the way, is realizing I can go so many directions with the story and all of it could be great. And eventually you realize, okay, I have to pick one direction and go. I'm not saying that's with every single story. I'm not saying that there's legitimacy behind every single storyline, right? Again, I'm just saying something very simple. There are stories written by competent writers where different angles of the story can be true. There are still angles of storytelling that are fundamentally wrong, right? For instance, woke storytelling is fundamentally wrong. But outside of wokeness, there are stories that have all the legitimacy in the world to be made and written, and they have slightly different justifications to their narrative. Because ultimately, this is what it comes down to. The truth is unconditional. Or you could say that the truth is fixed. The truth has a very rigid baseline that exists within it, okay? However, within the truth, there is also the reality that the truth is also conditional. There are variations of the truth. And it's not so much a coin. I said this before in another playthrough, but it's not that the truth is a coin, or there's two sides of the coin. No. The truth is like a dice, and there's multiple sides to the dice. The fundamental truth is the dice itself. The dice is the fundamental truth. You cannot get rid of the dice. But ultimately, upon all the faces of the dice, there are different expressions of the truth that are true, that are real. So, right, the fact that, right, for instance, what is the dice? What's an example of the dice in real life? Okay? Let's say cultures are homogenous, racially, and therefore culturally, that's why they're homogenous. But cultures are made up of people of the same kind. Okay, that is a dice right there. That is a fundamental truth. Cultures are not made up of people from other races. No, cultures are made up of one race. Once you engage with multiculturalism, you have a culture war, is what you have. Multiculturalism equals a culture war. Multiculturalism represents as well, not only does it represent a war, but also multiculturalism represents a conflict between the ideals of separate races. So that must be understood. This is the fundamental truth. This is the dice that you cannot change. Same thing with there are men and there are women. There is XX and there's XY. Okay? Those chromosomes make up what we know to be the dice of reality. XX and XY. Okay? You cannot remove men and women. That is a constant. That is the dice. Now, are there some men who behave a little bit less masculine than other men? Yes. So that is a side of the dice. There are some men who are neutral in their masculinity, some men who are overt, some men who are completely neutered in their masculinity, etc., etc. And some of it is somewhat a problem, but some of it is also just, right, it's different flavors of the same dish, okay? We're still serving chicken, it just has different flavors, okay? Right, there's no fundamental issue with the masculinity, it's just that the masculinity has slightly different sides to the coin. It's not that the men are effeminate, it's just that some men, let's say, are less masculine than other men. Okay, so once we understand this, same thing with women, right? There's women who, and we're not talking about women being masculine, but there are women who express different shades of femininity, right? You have different archetypes of femininity. You have a character like Catwoman, for instance, and you have a character like Princess Sarah within Strangers of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins, okay? They're all women, they're all effeminate, maybe in slightly more problematic ways than the other, Like, Catwoman is fine as a character in her own vacuum, but if other women started to try behaving like Catwoman, it would just be malicious in the end. Most women cannot actually possess a character like Catwoman because Catwoman ultimately does not disrespect men. She does not disrespect Harvey Dent, Batman, but ultimately, right, she's against Harvey Dent. She's kind of sworn enemies of Harvey Dent, and she's ultimately aloof and elusive, but ultimately coy, sexual, and playful and flirtatious with Batman. She is fine with her expression of femininity, but ultimately, Catwoman is the sort of femininity that honestly has a whole kind of mastery or expertise curve that most women do not possess. Most women are not capable of understanding how to behave in a flirtatious manner like Catwoman. So it becomes very problematic when women try to emulate Catwoman and her behavior because they just become insufferable feminists. And they think that Catwoman's character is about being Miss Independent. That's not her character at all. The only reason that there is a Catwoman is because there is a Batman. She just exists in a way that... Anyways, I don't have to get into this. Love of God. I've gone into it before in the, specifically the Batman playthrough. So let's not get into it here because it's just going to be tiring. But then you have characters like Princess Sarah, who is absolutely innocent, pure, modest woman. She is just absolutely a splendid character in every way whatsoever. I mean, she's a true girly character, feminine character, but it doesn't make a character like Catwoman any less sexy or attractive, and vice versa from how sexy and attractive Catwoman is compared to a character like Princess Sarah. These are two different characters, and they work despite how different they are from each other. Different shades of femininity, same thing works with men. You have characters like Arthur Morgan, Solid Snake, Cloud Strife, and they're all different shades of masculinity. Fundamentally, they're all masculine. You can also throw in a character like Barrett from Final Fantasy VII. You have all these different characters of masculinity, but they're all masculine. And they're not petty, they're not petty thugs, they're not these degenerates, they're all men, right? We're not removing that dice. The dice exists, but it has all these sides and all these shades or expressions of that fundamental reality. I forget why we're talking about this now. Anyways, that's what I'm talking about though. When we're looking at storytelling, there's different shades of reality that we're no longer willing to express, and that's because we're hell-bent on the propaganda of liberalism. How dare you make a story that isn't liberal? How dare you make a story where the empire wins? How dare you make a story where where the villain is understandable? Maybe he's a neutral party, right? How dare you make a story where the protagonist is a Sith Lord, and we're following a Sith Lord, and we're not going to apologize for justifying the Sith Lord in the story, right? A Sith Lord who's a little bit sadistic, a Sith Lord who will enslave certain planets, exterminate certain planets based on a certain methodology, and we're not going to apologize for it. It's you, the literal paying customer who can think like an adult. You make the decision for yourself. Do I think Lord Renan or whatever, Revan I think it was, or, do I think, Darth Malgus or whoever else, do I think they're a bad guy? Do I think they're, do I think they're kind of cool as a villain? Or do I think that they're completely irredeemable, blah, 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 the whole thing? And the truth of the matter is that there's plenty of men who love both Batman and Joker. They love the maniacal mind, the gruesome mind, and they love the sophisticated mind, right? The Valorant mind, like, of course, as we see with Batman. That is both sides of male psychology, is Joker and Batman. Guess what we do in modern civilization today, though? We completely shut out the Joker mindset, because we act like, and remember, why did the first Joker film, right, with Joaquin Phoenix, I never watched it, I wanted to watch it, but I just never got around to it. but I was interested by it, and I liked the psychological angle of it, which was, but okay, let's just get to what I was saying though. Why did it sell so well? Why did so many people want to watch the movie? Why did it strike such a chord? Because there's a side of dark psychology that is implicit within men. Okay? There's the dark psychology. Men love both the Jedi and the Sith. But what we've been doing in modern civilization progressively as the years have gone by, as modernity has taken its root and taken its hold, what we have done is we have taken the sadistic mind of and the dark psychology mindset of a character like the Joker. And we said that is unacceptable, that is irredeemable, you're evil, and in some way you need to be punished for being a male that possesses in some way the dark or the gruesome psychology of male psychology. So it's become a repressed desire now of civilization. And what we're doing is we're just bottling up. And again, when you block out one, you're going to erupt the other. Okay? We are talking right now about a gas vent or gas pipe. And it is being funneled or being fueled from the top. Imagine it coming from the roof. It's coming down by one pipe, but it must be released on two ends because there's so much pressure from both ends of all that gas coming out of the gas pipe. If you cover up one, eventually you're going to overblow the other side, or you're going to cause some kind of imbalance in wherever the room is that you're blowing all the gas into, or whatever. In some way, somehow, the gas pipe, though, is going to just burst because there's too much force being spent on one side of the outtake. And this is how the human mind works. You can't just expand the pipe for the further load of the gas that's being vented out. No. The way that the human mind is developed is that we have both sides of psychology that must be vented out. We have both Batman and the Joker. We have both the Jedi and the Sith within our psyches as men. It is a matter of disciplining oneself to be temperate within both. If you cannot master the temperance, you will burst from one side of the pipes that are being vented out of. You must be venting out of both sides. You cannot suffocate yourself on either or psychology. And in some way, we're even suffocating now the male psychology of Batman too. So overall, both the sophisticated mind in a lot of ways and also the gruesome mind are both being nowadays more so on the gruesome, but also almost soon to be equally on the sophisticated mind as well. We're being suffocated in so many ways, right? Because we are killing and we are destroying characters like Batman, like Superman, like go down the list. We're killing heroes left and right. And what we are doing is that we are perverting the balance, the mixture between the dark, the gruesome, and the sophisticated mind. That is where we are now. You need both stories. And the problem is that we have such an egalitarian, propagandistic culture where if we show you a story about a Sith Lord who revels in sadism and whatnot, then that's somehow going to set someone loose and they're going to become a homicidal maniac. Absolutely false. And as I've been saying again and again, in the age of where we're supposed to be getting so much of one thing that's supposed to be good, we're losing the things that actually matter and the things that actually have value. In the age of civil rights, which is really just civil entitlements, we are eroding the most of our civil liberties. And in an age where we are supposed to be the most coddled and the most peaceful of minds, guess what we have nowadays? We have the most mental illness. Listen, I've always said this and it's true. Mental illness is gay. Okay? Mental illness is gay. There is no such thing as mental illness. But when you cause damage to your psyche and you impose upon yourself your own traumas and your own damages, you cause for yourself your own problems, or you continue to incur your own injuries, or you continue to reopen your old wounds, whatever it is, as you commit aggressions against yourself. And that's what all this is. That what you fundamentally have done is that you are going to have mental illness because you are constantly mentally sabotaging yourself. Mental sabotage creates mental illness. There is no such thing as mental illness if you do not constantly sabotage your psyche. There are people who have legit, medical, psychological misbehaviors or malignant, some form of malignance, right? Some sort of malevolence. We're not talking about people that have legit medical issues, okay? We're talking just about normal people. And again, in the age of where we are supposed to be the most enlightened, we're the most peaceful, people are losing it the most because we are shutting out our authentic, truthful psychology. We're telling ourselves that the real world is not real anymore, that being what you are is not real anymore, that we're telling ourselves that the dark psychology is the unacceptable psychology. How dare you ever think in a way that justifies a Sith Lord or an empire or whatever else that we can think of, right? How dare you support colonization? How dare you support, the sexism between the two sexes, right? How dare you think that men and women are different? How dare you think that different cultures and different races of different groups, how dare you think that they're different because they show that they're different all the time? Go look, just go to China. It does not look like Europe. You're going to tell me that these people are the same. No, we're not the same. There's a reason why everything is different. There's a reason why women wear different clothing than men. People are different. That is the inherent truth of the world, are our differences. And it cultivates a different reality. You can't escape it. But now we live in a world where we prefer our fantasies over reality. And so here we are. Isn't it interesting though? That in the age where we're doing everything supposedly right, we're losing everything that ever actually had proven value throughout history. Isn't it interesting that we're losing civil liberties? And that is the one constant all throughout human civilization that's ever mattered. Not human entitlements, not human civil rights, which are entitlements. No. Civil, not human, but civil. Civil liberties, civil rights. Civil rights are, all they are civil entitlements. Civil liberties are justified and meritorious values that we have proven throughout multiple civilizations, multiple republics, that civil liberties are important and they must be upheld by men who are good and strong, men who earned upon themselves their liberties. Civil rights are just civil entitlements. It is a weak man telling you that you must suffice him, and that is false. There is no justification for a weak man. That is why civil liberties, you will always find strong civilizations will always uphold civil liberties. And that is always what matters, and that's always what is important. That is the inherent dice to reality and to government or governance. The inherent truth, the inherent reality of governance. The dice of governance is civil liberties, not civil rights. Let me say it one more time, okay? In the age of where we police the most on morality and conduct, how you're supposed to behave yourself, how much we suffocate the dark psychology, the gruesome psychology of man's mind. And by the way, we would never exist in this world without that psychology. Women would be dead. And in some past era, without a gruesome psychology in men. Okay? The world is safer because of gruesome men who are not belligerent, but they are temperate. And there's a very fine line, a very fine balancing act in all of this. What I'm saying is that the belligerent man, most often throughout history, has always been the petulant, petty thug type of man. All he does is corrode the civilization around him. No one likes that man. We love, however, and it's the only reason we're all here in civilization today is because of generations of gruesome men who had some balance of temperance, some less, some more, whatever. But in the age where we police the most of our conduct and our morality is the age where we also happen to have the most mental illness. That is a huge point being made here. But do not forget, because this is the other thing that I'm getting to here, outside of the how much we police ourselves, what that creates. I honestly forget what the frick I was talking about. I was trying to process through it. That's why something like The Joker sold so well with Joaquin Phoenix. Because what we are doing is that we are suppressing passive, natural psychology out of men. And we are desperate for raw masculinity. And, oh, that was the thing I was going to get to, though. Again, mental illness is not real, and it is gay. It is simply men who have been emasculated. That is mental illness. And acting like, coming to terms with, and embracing or confronting your dark psychology, your gruesome psychology. We act like nowadays it'll just turn any audience member, it'll turn them into some kind of, homicidal maniac. We always act like it'll just turn someone into a crazy serial killer. If they see a story like The Joker, for instance, Joaquin Phoenix. Literally, that's what the journalists were raging on about. It didn't happen, right? And actually what was funny, right? Wasn't it at Frozen 2? You actually had, it's sad, but, I think there was like a stabbing or something at a Frozen 2 movie. It's because it has nothing to do with each other. And again, though, women cannot understand the discipline of the male psyche between dark/gruesome psychology and the sophisticated mind. They do not understand the balancing act. They are incapable of the balancing act. If they tried, they would destroy the world. That is the only thing they would ever do. Women ultimately process specifically emotion differently. Negative emotion strikes women much more deeply. Men are much more resilient emotionally. And that's why for women, they never were meant to and they never should be in charge of governing the world, regulating the world. And a part of regulating the world is that you must enact and employ the gruesome mind and the sophisticated mind. At the same time, you must understand the balancing act. That's what makes any great strategist, leader, a ruler of a kingdom of any kind or country, is a man that can possess both the gruesome mind and the sophisticated mind. And never listen to a woman, ever, on anything. Doesn't matter what she complains about, nothing. Doesn't matter. They'll either lead you down the path of absolute destruction, absolute embitterment or malevolence, or they'll lead you down the road of absolute coddling and enfeeblement. Is the only thing that women are capable of doing. Is committing themselves to the most unproductive extremes that the human mind can fathom. That is all a woman's mind is capable of doing. And that is why a world must be and can only be governed by men. Because ultimately we keep women from the malevolence that they wish to and can enact upon themselves and others. And just looking at modern day, with how free, air quotes free women are of men nowadays. Everything is a wreck. The economy is dying. Like so many layers of the economy is being torn apart. We have so much debt in the economy. A bunch of money has been spent that nobody can pay off and nobody will ever pay off. It's 3/4, I believe, of credit card debt is held by women. 2/3 of student loan debt held by women, and that number's probably gone up, let's be honest, since the time of those numbers. Those numbers are like anywhere between 5 to 10 years old now. Some of these numbers, by the way, they've even stopped reporting on, but not completely. So in some ways, they've just recategorized the way that they report on the numbers, but consumerism is still led by women. And of course, debt is led by women. And whenever women do afford things, they typically rely upon the financial backing of some man. They never pay for their own stuff, ever. And we talked about this in a separate playthrough, so we're not going to probably get into it here. I should make all this just a separate video at this point. Anyways, let's just get back down to what we're talking about. You cannot remove what people really want. And I am so sick and tired of these stories where I am just not allowed to have the one thing that is necessary and that we deserve. Treat us like adults. Stop giving me the same and old and tired liberal storylines that we've been getting for how long now. Give me a story about a legitimate character who just has hatred. And that's it. They're hateful and they're angry and they are a character like a story about like a god of war, right? Ares. And that's in some way, that's what Kratos was about. Now they've turned him into the god of soy, right? Freaking god of war is more the guy that's being told by his son who screws everything up, do better, governor. Literally tells his father like 5 times in the story, do better. And yet Atreus is being a freaking douche nozzle, stupid child, ruining everything. His father's the one fixing his son's messes. And his son has the gall to sit there and say, do better. Get out of here, bro. We can't have characters like Kratos anymore, though. And I never even liked Kratos that much as a character. I was never even that crazy about the God of War series. But there's a part of me that had appreciation for it existing, for what it was, for this fact that Kratos was just so nonchalant about just banging tons of hot women. I loved the archetype of Kratos. I was never big on playing those games or anything, but we don't get characters like that anymore, right? It's what the gaming journalists call problematic, right? I'm sorry, that's a little bit problematic. And it's like, get out of here, man. Seriously, you freaking losers. Trying to police everybody. You're trying to suffocate the male psyche. Look at the men that we have today, by the way, right? Look how much men have been pussified. This is so pathetic. Like, you want to understand that the kind of character that Kratos is? Just go look at WWE. Remember Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? The masculinity that he showed when he was with WWE? The masculinity that so many of those wrestlers showed during that time period? You know, they would call each other names, they would make stupid jokes, they weren't afraid of sexualizing women in WWE. It was just raw masculinity. And it was a way of creating fun out of the gruesome mind of masculinity. Now, of course, I was never like huge into WWE. Quite frankly, I don't really care for it. But it's the fact, but it created so much to remember. And it was that exact culture that created characters like Kratos. And now what do we have? Everything is soy driven, soy boy this, soy boy that. Even though I was never really a fan of WWE, what I did like were the archetypes of WWE in a culture that celebrates something like WWE. It's not just that, so many other examples, right? But we just can't have this anymore. We can't have, because for some reason when a man is masculine and a man lives truthfully as he can by his masculine impulses, right? How boys want to wrestle, how they want to roar at each other from a very young age on playgrounds. You know, how men have this instinct, this intrinsic desire to fight, right? To butt their heads against issues and all that. We've walked away from a culture that embraces masculinity and does not act like you're going to become a homicidal maniac because you want to punch some other kid on the playground, right? Or you think there's a certain group of kids who should be kicked out of the playground or whatever, right? There's a balance of pro-social and anti-social behavior and personality that is very important to the human mind and the male mind. And what we have completely done is that we have completely demonized the antisocial mind of masculinity, and now we have created the most malevolent minds of antisocial behavior. Seriously, we have compounded the problem by suffocating it. By doing everything in your power to coddle, you've only compounded the issue. Again, this is a gas pipe. It is being funneled from the top to the ceiling, and it's being released from two ends of that pipe vent. If you cover up one, you're overloading the other pipe. There's going to be too much pressure and it's going to burst. Okay? That is what we are doing. And at this point now, they're trying to suffocate both ends of the pipe. So now the whole pipe is going to burst. The whole thing is going to explode. You can't do this to male psychology. This is detrimental. This is disastrous. This is going to create far more problems long term than it will ever create solutions. And by the way, this was never even intended to be a solution to anything. There's nothing that needs to be solved for male aggression. It's always been the solution for the human race, all throughout time and history. Never the problem. So we created a solution for a non-problem. What do you think that's going to do? That just creates new problems. So here we are. I'm so tired of stories like these. I'm so tired of liberalism. I'm so tired of having to be coddled by my games. I'm so tired of having to be... freaking popped my ears. What the F? Jeez Louise, man. that was weird. What we've done with masculinity, though, is that we have shackled it so extensively. We have these stories now, and all they can be are these... Basically, these are effeminate storylines, okay? A storyline about how you how you're constantly moralizing and basically fetishizing freedom from oppression. That's what the story is. It's a fetishizing of freedom from oppression. Stories like these, fundamentally, are female developed and female minded stories. This is not a masculine story, and I'm so tired of this. I want a story playing as a slave. He's not wallowing about it. He's not like, oh my god, I'm a slave. No, he's a slave. All the men around him are pieces of trash, right? They've done certain things. Some of them are good men, some of them are bad men. They're all slaves, and the story is about you fighting to earn your freedom. It's not exactly Gladiator, right? But it's like, make a story about a mercenary slave, and he's not demanding his freedom. He accepts it upon himself. I'm a slave. This is the world I live in. I accept it. Now it is up to me to live up to my duty as a slave. Make a story like that. He develops with certain men who are really rowdy. They're really offensive. They call other people slurs and names. Have male characters like those. Have male characters who are not so much like that. And have them all come together. A hodgepodge group of random men. They're all thrown around with each other into a mercenary group. And they butt heads a lot. Some of them even fight to a very bloody extent. Maybe even one of them gets injured. And through them fighting one another and having all their disagreements and having all their differences, they end up being friends by the end of the freaking story, right? They develop a brotherhood. They learn to rely on each other, despite their initial distaste or even hate of each other. And ultimately, none of them earn their freedom except for the main character, or maybe one of the characters that the main character knows, and he sacrifices his life for one of those other characters, right? Because that other character, he did the thing that it took for the king of the realm or whatever to say, fine, I will allot you, this one man, his freedom, right? A story where only one man out of that group becomes a freed man from his slavery. And the others, they don't whine, they don't bicker about it. They don't incessantly have soy-gasms like Alphen in this game does about slavery. No, they take it upon themselves and they go through the world accepting upon themselves what they are, who they are, the world that they're thrust into. They don't like each other. They don't get along. They have wildly different personalities, and they all end up as brothers at the end of the story. And one of them, maybe not even the main character, right? But one of them becomes, it could even be the worst character in the group, right? Let's say that the worst character of the group in the story, he forcibly copulates himself with a man who's not a slave, his wife. He forcibly copulates on her. And let's say the story ends with that guy becoming a freed man, despite everyone around him being of a nobler character. better word, a far more honorable character. Just imagine a story like that. I mean, you are treating in that kind of a story innately, you're treating your audience as adults. You're not shying away, you're not coddling anyone, you're not pandering to anyone. No. You are willing, again, you have to be willing to make stories like this where good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. We always get these stories where all the good things happen to the hero because the hero has to win. Okay, that's lazy storytelling. I need to be on the edge of my seat where I believe that the hero can fail at any moment in time. I need to be, and again, I need to have stories where literally one of the buddies of my hero, or the main character who's a decent guy or whatever, is literally a piece of trash that, right, forcibly copulates with a woman, right? A woman that isn't a slave. So now there's a hierarchy issue too in the world that we're set in. It's not a noble woman, but she's right, it's like middle class or something, right? And there's issues with that. It's something that maybe the characters, they try to hide for a while before one of the lieutenants, let's say, who's not a slave. He's leading the mercenary group though, let's say. He hears about this somewhere later in the story. He gets pissed off. Or of course, maybe, instead, what would make more sense is that the noble woman, or sorry, not the noble woman, but the woman that's not a slave, right? The middle class woman who got forcibly copulated against, let's say that she, right, eventually talks about it to her husband, right? And then there's a hysteria in that city, in that town, in the story, and your characters deal with the fact that they're not willing to admit who did it. And nobody in the group likes this guy, this character. And he's not even necessarily written to be a bad guy either. Because that's the other thing. I hate how we do this in writing, where we have to make obviously evil characters. They speak a certain way. They talk a certain way. The second that there's a guy in a story that's meant to betray you down the road, they always talk in a way where they're supposed to be sleazy. Why don't we just have a guy that's like literally, you assume that this guy is like a Chad, right? This guy is the pinnacle of men. He's the guy that's Mr. Steal Your Girl. Everyone thinks that he's the best dude on the block. And he's the character that ends up doing the forcible copulation for whatever reason. How much more interesting a story like that would be. And all the main character in the group that he's associated with, right? All these other male characters that are different from each other, different personalities, they don't like each other. Some of them can simply only tolerate each other, but any prolonged period of time and they don't like each other. Throughout the beginning, and let's even say the middle of the story, whatever. But the guy that you wouldn't expect to be the forcible copulator, and everyone kind of thinks he's a good guy, but he's also slightly a douchebag. So that he's like a complex character. Not all of him is bad, but not all of him is good. But he's still at the end of the day, as the story concludes, he's still a piece of trash. But maybe, let's say also, maybe there's a slight reduction. He's a piece of trash throughout the story, for the most part, despite not being all bad. But by the end of the story, the fact that he was the only one to become a free man, let's say that does something to fundamentally change his character, but doesn't completely convert his character. Because that's the other thing that's super lazy about writing nowadays, is that characters just simply convert. Oh, I was a piece of trash, now I'm the good guy. No, let's just say that he has a slight change of heart. He's still somewhat a douchebag, but now he's slightly more caring, or he's slightly more, he tries to do things, he tries to go out of his way more for no good reason. It's not even for the benefit of others, but because he sees his brothers who risked for his life to be free. They risked their own lives so that he could be free. Now you see him, not out of the goodness of his heart, but he's just, now for some reason, he just randomly tries to help people, save people when they're in trouble. It doesn't mean he's not a douchebag. It doesn't mean he's not, right? That kind of character complexity. Having a character who's not flacked. Having a character who's not the destined hero of the story, or like he's not the guy that's supposed to be the person that you're rooting for, but he ends up with the hero's outcome, right? The hero was the one that was supposed to be freed, but for some reason it's the piece of trash guy does the piece of trash things, and he only makes a slight character improvement by the life-changing action of his kind of begrudging brotherhood group, right? Mercenary group. That is already a far better story than whatever dog water horse crap we're getting today, including this game. A story like this that we're getting today, where I'm so sick and tired of all this liberalism, all these friendship narratives that are so gay, I'm so sick and tired of a friendship narrative where it's like, we're all friends, nobody offends each other, nobody hates each other. I'm sick of this crap. Give me a story like I just described. That's just one layer of the story, but just that one layer, that's already a greater story than what we get today. That's already a story that's going to land hard with you in so many ways. You're going to feel some level of rage after this guy that's not like a blatant piece of trash, right? He's very suave, he's handsome, he's a guy that looks clean cut, but forcibly copulates a non-slave woman. Think about that. Who's married to a non-slave man. Think about that. Just think about that kind of a story. That is an insane story. Imagine the delivery. And again, the delivery is that much more because the writer's not telling you what to think. The character that does the bad action, he's not obviously a bad guy, but he's like really rough around the edges in certain distinct elements. Imagine a story like that. And in the end, all of the good men around him are the ones who sacrifice the most. Imagine that kind of a story. And again, every bit of that, all the range of emotions are going to land that much more with you. You're going to feel rage when he does the forcible copulation. You're going to feel, the slight guilt, but also the slight guilt, but also, let's say, also the shame of the fact that the characters, they don't want to be caught and they don't want their mercenary group in whatever way to be punished by his action. And by the way, he's not punished for like any moral indignation. It's just because of class hierarchy reasons. Matter of the world, you're a slave, you did this to this non-slave woman, we have to punish you and your group of men. So now you're experiencing the rage of what he did, but now you're also experiencing the shame and the guilt by the fact that the characters do not want to admit who did it, or even if their group did it. And what if even in the storyline, doesn't have to go this way, but could happen, where they scapegoat another group. These are not bad men, but due to the situation that they're in, they're like, it just happens to be a matter of the scenario that they scapegoat another group of dudes, another mercenary group, that they like another platoon that they work with. And an innocent guy is the one that gets punished. Already better. Now you're working off of rage, you're working off of, and again, the writer's not telling you what to think. The writer's being objective about this. They don't care. They're not moralizing it, any of it. But already within the situation, you're going to feel implicit rage, implicit shame, implicit guilt. You're going to have a whole range of emotions because of what that story is about. And then the fact that by the end of the story, these guys eventually develop a brotherhood, that they all feel for each other in some weird way, where they're willing to sacrifice their lives for each other. They kind of get along better now than they ever did before. And then literally all these good men from this group, or better men, maybe they're not good men, but they're better men. Then what they do is they sacrifice their own lives for the freedom, right? And you write it well enough that it makes sense. It's easy to do this if you're effective at writing. But they risk their own lives for the freedom of the forcible copulator. And then, as I said before, right, the forcible, that guy, he has a fundamental character shift that's very minor, but it's obviously connected to what those men did for him. They slightly changed. Imagine a whole story about those type of characters. Imagine a whole story about men like that. That is already so much more interesting. That is a story that you will remember for years. You would probably sit down and watch that story with your kids, specifically with your sons, because of all the lessons on masculinity that could teach you, but also just like understanding all the depth of the human mind. Because there's so much that you can do other than what I just defined and explained. There's so much that story could do. Just think about it. How much a story like that, right? Because like that tests the mind, that tests your own psychology, right? It's like, I understand why they risked everything for that guy, but it's still a piece of trash, right? That internal conflict that you're having in your mind, and then processing that out with your kids, right? With your sons, showing them that movie, let's say, that storyline. And for young men to see that kind of a story where it's like, these men are taking upon themselves the brunt of being slaves. They're not complaining about it. These are imperfect men, and they even sacrifice themselves for the most imperfect man of the group. Think of all the things that says about masculinity. Think of how that gets a young boy becoming a young man, what that gets him to think about, how that gets him to process in his head about what the burden of masculinity is, right? That inherently is a masculine story. That inherently is a story that's going to get you through a whole range of emotions. That's the kind of story that gets you thinking. That's the kind of story that has the power to enlighten, to serve the inherent function and premise of storytelling. And what's sad is we will never get a story like that. Not for right now. Especially out of these game developers, all these liberal writers. They're not willing to make an offensive story with offensive characters, with scenes and scenarios where they're not telling you what to think, but things just happen and you make the decision of what you think and what you believe. A story where you are treated as an adult no matter your age. That's what storytelling used to be. Those are the stories that we loved throughout all these generations, right? Stories like The Godfather, about raw, unapologetic masculinity, despite how imperfect the world is, your burden of performance. That's why we love so many masculine stories, is because they carry inherent truth, inherent enlightenment, which of course therefore means truth. Those are the kinds of stories that we won't get anymore. And again, I'm just saying that as one layer of the story. There's already a whole other story going on in that story, right? Because you're already a part of a mercenary group, so you're being tasked to do certain things because there's a larger story going on. How cool would a story like that be? It wouldn't just be a cool story. That would be a timeless story. That would be a generational story. There's so much inherent value to a story like that. We know that throughout history, there's so many men who've gone and lived through that story that I just described. This is why I say what I'm saying right now. This is why, like, so often, man, I'm playing this game right now because there's nothing better to play. I hate everything that's modernity. This game is modernity. It's just less of it. They're sneaking it under the rug. The preface of this game are normal relationships, boy meets girl world, just traditional gender dynamics, not roles. The roles are not traditional, but their dynamics are. The women are treated as women, the men are treated as men. Specifically, Alfin is kind of the head of the group, the leader of the group, and Shion is the helper of Alfin. She literally bestows to him his sword that gives him further power, but he's the one that wields it, and it's a source of Alfin's weird ability to not feel pain that he's able to wield the sword. But ultimately, the powerful character is not the woman, it's the man in this story, but she is the vessel to which he can extend his power, is ultimately what she is. Which is fine, it's fine. Because ultimately, she's like a supportive element of making Alfin's character further more powerful. So there's traditional gender dynamics here, despite some of the gender roles not entirely being traditional. There's some facade of traditionalism going on here. That's why I'm here. The women are sexy and attractive. That's why I'm still here. I like looking at Shion. That's why I'm still here. It's for every bit of normality that we do not get in modern games today. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm playing this game. But the reason why I keep on talking for long stretches of time as I'm playing this game is because I'm still dissatisfied with the experience that I'm getting. Because as I'm telling you right now, I can already think of better stories, better narratives, better deliveries, better executions of the story. And so because of that, I'm going through these very long-winded explanations of the things that we're not getting anymore. Of how these things could be improved, or how these things ought to be, because that's always what sold the best, and that's always what was. Listen, we got so many good films in the past, so many great games with great stories, and it's just because the ideological makeup of the writers used to be normal. Nowadays, everyone's woke. This game is woke. It has ESG elements thrown in. It's so frustrating because it's like, I just want a good story. This is all I want. Simple fact of the matter is you won't get it. It's modernity, bro. I would literally have to start playing older games if I want to get good stories. And I just mean good. Not great, not exceptional, not masterpiece. understand how low the bar has been set. Today, people think that great stories today are the very same stories that would have been laughed out of the room even 10 years ago. More specifically though, like 15 years ago. Like nowadays, dog water horse crap is given praise, literally celebrated. The dog water horse crap that we get today is literally celebrated. I can't stand it, man. I really cannot stand it. You know what? I think I said all this in the most perfect manner I ever could. So I'm actually thinking I might have to make this a separate video. Like I'll just literally take what I'm talking about here and make it the video for this, because a dedicated video for this topic, because I think this is the best way I could have ever put all of these thoughts. I think either it'll be 2 to 3 videos, everything I just spoke about right here, and I might just overlay me actually playing through gameplay as I'm speaking, you know, whatever. We'll see what I do, but the whole point of the matter is just that if I did try to talk about this, there's probably a bunch of points that I would just miss if I tried to do a dedicated video on this. We covered all the bases pretty well here, but that's what I mean every time I'm talking about these things. That's what I mean when I say I'm so tired of liberal storytelling. That's what I mean when I say that I could do better than this. That's what I mean when I just talk about all this stuff, that you have past writers that did better work than this. And I'm so frustrated as I play this game because this is the best that there is right now on the market. But it's crazy to me that what's best on the market is so insufferable in the lens of not wokeness, but quality. Okay, there's woke elements to this story, but there's enough that's not woke to this story that I can put up with it, right? But even outside of the non-woke, even with the non-woke elements, the quality of the story, it's so generic, it's painful. I'm not impressed by what I'm being shown here. I want stories made for adults. I want stories that get you thinking. I want stories made by men for men. And by the way, young boys have the ability and the capacity to think like men. That is the power of great storytelling, is to mature and to discipline and to develop an introspective and exploratory mind. Nowadays, we are literally pussifying and we are retarding young men nowadays. We are babying them. We're not getting them to process the world through a masculine lens, to think about life from a masculine perspective. We are raising soy boys nowadays. And we're seeing the results of that, by the way. We're seeing all the consequences. It's not good. Stories like these are made to further pussify men and to operate upon the liberal victim fetishization. The liberal fetishization around slavery or some kind of liberal position that is based within a victim mindset. I'm so sick and tired of liberal fetishes. I'm so tired of it. I want to see masculine stories again. I'm so tired of it, dude. So tired of it. Like, it's so sad. We used to get really great stories. I remember a story like Uncharted 3. That was a great story. It's about a young boy, right? A retrospective story about how Nathan Drake, he developed a sort of surrogate father-son relationship with Sully through having a hard upbringing as an orphan child. It was like kind of like a weird rendition of Aladdin in some weird way. Not entirely, but you get the point. Uncharted 3 was a great story. I really loved it. I love Nathan Drake's character. And of course, now Naughty Dog is woke. So a character like Nathan Drake is just destroyed now. He's not masculine anymore. He doesn't just randomly tussle and fight men on the street. Like, he was a rough and gruff kind of like James Bond. Let's just be honest. And he was such a cool character. And now we've pussified Nathan Drake. And we don't get great stories surrounding characters like Nathan Drake anymore. But that was such a great, that was a great game series for its time, for the time that it existed. You know how I have to put it now? We don't get stories anymore. We don't get stories anymore. That's the truth of it. We're not getting stories anymore. We're just not. We're getting ideological propaganda. That is all we're getting as of today. You also gotta love how in these liberal storylines, no one is right. Nobody is stupid. Nobody's lazy. Nobody's right. Like all the people that we're supposed to identify with and feel sorry for, you know, they're not raging losers. Well, it kind of makes it that much easier to sell whatever point that you're trying to make through the characters in the story when you make everyone not be losers. But that's the issue, is like philosophy has to be based within the real world. And a lot of philosophy is a tandem between considering losers and winners, right? Good men and pathetic men. That is what philosophy is based upon, is creating a kind of equilibrium in addressing both minds and having a preference over one to the other. Specifically, typically cultivating a strong mindset over a weak mindset, right? Rather than thinking like some kind of weak, lazy, fat man, you think like a man that is strong, effective, lives up to his duties and his burdens with excellence. That's typically the entire purpose of philosophy, is a mindset of strength, not weakness. Here's the thing, is that, and this is what I'm so tired of, there's not enough, and there's really no anymore, there's no true competition in the market for these games and for these stories. And really what it is that everyone's competing to make the same game, to make the same story, to make the same product now. And the stories are all the same.